Welcome, everyone, to Decoding Destiny Sound Bites from the C-Suite. Join me every week as I capture strategies from incredibly successful women and share these sound bites to help you decode challenges and map your own destiny. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and in whatever app you use to listen to podcasts. Today, I am meeting with Linda González, a life coach, author, and facilitative consultant, and discussing how to act your age and why our real age may be very different than our biological age. Linda is a bilingual organizational consultant, coach, and writer with many years of experience facilitating and training groups of diverse participants in many arenas. Underlying all her work is a focus on equity, grounded in systemic change to allow all people to thrive. Linda's focus is to offer clients models and tools that can be used to transform structural inequities and internalize glass ceilings. Linda has a thriving practice as a life coach, assisting clients to discover and reach their important goals while taking into account the impact of biases still present in society. She recently published a book titled Breaking Through Your Own Glass Ceiling, based on her 20-year coaching practice, with a focus on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, immigrants, and other under-resourced resilient communities. Welcome, Linda.
Well, thank you so much, Irina. I'm excited to be here with you and everybody listening.
You have a fantastic background. Tell me a little bit more than what I kind of gave to the audience.
Yes. Well, I live what I call a hashtag bouquet life. I have never wanted to do one thing. And so I have always been challenged to find ways to do all the things that I am passionate about and that bring me joy, but also that lead to other people thriving in the world. My background was in social work, and I quickly realized that I really enjoyed being my own boss and being able to manage my schedule and the work that I did and to pick the projects and the people that would really benefit the best of what I bring and also what they're looking for. So I love the collaboration process. I currently live on coastal Miwok land in Marin County, and my favorite sport to play and watch is tennis.
Ooh, very nice. Thank you. Well, let's jump into it because I'm super excited about this. What do you mean when you say people don't act their age?
Yes, this is a really important awareness that I have had over the years, particularly in terms of my coaching clients and my own life, and particularly in terms of writing my book. It really made me sit and think, what does that really mean, and why do we all struggle to feel like we're grown up, or why do we always feel like we're not enough? And from that, I began to understand that there are multitudes of ages that we have to grow up in. And nobody tells us this. So, my experience as I began to dig into this was that we have 8 key elements in our maturation process, and that we can be in different ages or maturity for all kinds of reasons, which I will unpack as we carry on in our conversation. One of the things that is challenging is we don't know what these are. So, how could we possibly understand what we need to do? We often don't have good role models. And so we depend on who we see. And the other thing is that because it's a lot to grow up in 8 different areas of our life, we will tend to focus on one or two that we're really good at and that people give us praise for. And then we often will neglect some of the others to our detriment as we get older and wiser.
So you have to tell us. Let's start. What are the 8 elements to this maturation process?
I know. Well, in my opinion, the 8 are first physical, just our physical being and growing up and understanding what it means to be a healthy human being. The second one is intelligence. And I'm going to go into each of all of these in some detail, but I want to name them. The third is emotions, like understanding and being feeling literate. The next is spirituality, and that's about what gives our life meaning. The next one is sensuality, which is about the enjoyment of physical, especially sexual pleasure. there are three more. The next one is creativity. So what is it that allows us to explore our imagination or come up with that idea or that solution that we never thought was possible? A really big one is financial. So really understanding and using money as energy and embracing the notion of prosperity. And finally, cultural. So do we know where we came from? Do we know how we identify? And do we know how to live fully in our cultural being?
Very cool. I can't wait. So, in each of these elements, which I want you to go through in more detail, how do you determine your age within each of them?
Well, fun fact, this will ultimately be a book. And in the book, and what I'm developing now is a continuum. So what I want to be able to give people is a continuum that says, say from 0 to 10. Okay, 0 is, wow, I do nothing in this realm. I never thought about creativity as a growth area or something that I needed to pay attention to and use in my life. Or you could be a 10 where you are intellectually, you have been rewarded for the things that you know, and that you have a thriving intellectual life that you nurture and that other people nurture with you. So the goal is to really think about that. And as I talk about it further, I'm going to talk a little bit about, in essence, what the higher level of that scale would be. I'm going to talk about the lower level. In other words, what are the things that block us or might have blocked us? And then I want to talk about one or two things that people can do to explore the areas that they are going to realize they have not really given that much attention to.
Excellent. All right. So the first one was intellectual.
Well, we can start there. Yes. So intellectual, in a broad sense, we want to think about it as defining the capacity to solve problems or to fashion products that are valued, and often in this country, certainly the United States, our intelligence is elevated. And so in many ways, this is rarely the one that people are low scoring in, because in our school, in our organizations, in our work, intelligence is one of the biggest things that people prize and attempt to achieve. However, the problem is that it's in a very narrow frame. Howard Gardner introduced the theory of multiple intelligences in 1983, but still we tend to have a very narrow idea of intelligence. And it is one of our blocks is that our intelligence is deeply influenced by standardized testing, by grades, by evaluations. And those are very narrow ways to talk about the broad range of intelligence, that everybody has different ways of manifesting intelligence. And so it's really important to understand that we have to first ask ourselves, what would it mean for me to be an intelligent person? What kind of intelligence am I good at? And how is it that I know how to articulate that and to share it with other people so that I can say, hey, you know what? I'm really good at figuring out these kinds of situations. Let me do this. Or to recognize other kinds of intelligence in other people, to say, hey, you're really good at that. What do you think about that? Right. So it's not only that when we understand ourselves, but it helps us to understand others and to be able to embrace the diversity that intelligence has. So in terms of acting your age there, I would definitely research and look into the multiple intelligence theory, figure out which one is your mojo, and then ask yourself, how is it that you can articulate that clearly to people and so that you can use it in the best way possible.
You make a good point. I think that we define intelligence very narrowly, and it's very much focused on maybe the small world or the small piece of the world that we live in and work in, whereas really broadening those horizons and becoming more aware of so much that's out there that maybe is not even ancillary to what you do, is critical for us to grow. So that's, even though we think we may be very mature in
That's
that
right.
aspect, I think that's one that a lot of people will be very surprised that they may not be as mature as they thought they were.
That's right. That's right. Because part of the problem can be that you have been pushed into an intelligence area that is actually not your joy. And so part of the importance of all of this for me is to find that joy, to go, wow, I've been always pushed here, but this level of intelligence or this kind of problem solving or puzzle making, puzzle completing is really what I enjoy. So how do I shift to be able to do the thing that I am good at, but also that I enjoy? That's a really important part for me, is to combine what you're good at and what you enjoy.
Definitely. Let's keep going.
Okay, so we're going to start with the physical. So, one of the things we don't think about is our brains physically develop, and it allows us to do more and more complex things. We often pay attention to our physical growth up through maybe our early 20s or even our mid 20s. Now that we know that's when men in particular, that's the final frontier for them to have their fully developed brains. The difference between, growing up physically and growing up in a mature way is about what are you doing around defining what health means to you? How is it that based on your body size, based on your gender identity, based on so many things, how is it that you define what brings you good health throughout your life? Have you thought about what is the best way to eat? What is the weight that is healthy for me? Not that weight that someone says I should be. What kind of fitness or exercise or sports do I enjoy? Like to really ask yourself those kinds of questions, because our physical body is with us for many, many, many years, and it needs different things at different times of our life. We often get very set in a routine, and it's usually based on what younger people can do. And then we bemoan the fact, I can't do that anymore. I'm no longer this. Or, I hear people talking about their limitations when they're in their 30s. And I'm like, I have gotten stronger and more flexible than ever as I've aged, because I have worked with my body and with what I love to do and what I know my body needs, rather than bemoaning again, it's a false idea of what it means to be physically fit and physically well. So that's the way I look at it in terms of that. And of course, the blocks are that there are these ideals that we think we have to live up to, and that are always impossible. And so we always think we never like our bodies the way they are. We are always paying attention to what is wrong versus, can I in this body do what I want to do in life? Like that to me is a big question. And so in terms of growing up, I think it's really important to ask yourself and to think, what is my current state of my health on all levels, based on my age, based on the things that I love to do. And then to really commit to the things that bring you joy. Once again, like I do strength training. I don't love it, but the results bring me joy. So sometimes the actual thing you're doing doesn't bring you joy per se, but the results of it and the benefit of it for me is why I do things that may be a little difficult. But I know that in the long run, my strength training, my yoga practice, and my tennis all flow well together.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I feel the same way about stretching. And I realize as I've gotten older that it is absolutely critical for my body to be flexible and to stretch and to not injure myself. And so I've actually found ways to find joy in that, just because of the feeling that I get post stretch, for example.
Exactly. All of these, in some level, ask you to be disciplined in the way that you understand this is really for my benefit, and also in the end the benefit of others, because not being ill and being able to do things helps everybody else in my life. They don't have to worry about how I'm doing or whether I am not taking care of myself. They can relax and go, oh yeah, I know she's got it going on, and so I can enjoy my life and not have to be worrying about her. So we forget that in all of these areas we are benefiting ourselves, but we're also benefiting the people around us. People are always like, I'm so inspired by you, and I go, great, I want you to be, but do what you need to do. Don't do what I do. That's the most important thing. One size does not fit all.
Very
and
true.
don't think, and I always tell people, they always think, oh, it just happens. I go, it does not just happen. It takes a calendar. It takes me paying people. It takes a real commitment to what I really want to see happen in my life.
Definitely. All right, number 3. And by the way, I know I started with the intelligence when it was really physical. I figured
It doesn't, it's good.
that.
It's okay. And if you say my name again, Linda, I use the same pronunciation as you do, Irina, right?
Yep.
I don't know what you do, but yeah. So that's it. Okay. So no worries. So the third aspect I want to talk about is your emotional growth and maturity. If we think about emotions, it's our feeling state and it's the way that we express ourselves and our behavior. Much of what we do is based deeply in our emotions. And as I mentioned around emotional intelligence, there are also, that's just like the other kind of intelligence I talked about. So there are critical skills that help us to manage our relationships, our work, and even our physical well-being. It's a great idea, but in reality, very few of us know how to read our feelings. And that's a huge block. I remember when I was doing some training around emotional literacy, and one of the core blocks in my life was that I had been so separated from my feelings for so many reasons that I didn't really know often what I was really feeling. I knew how to cover my feelings with feelings I was familiar with. And so I really had to look at it and understand why I was being triggered and what actions to take. I know I learned a lot from my immigrant parents. Their primary emotions were mad and powerful because they didn't think that being sad or scared or even peaceful was going to get them very far in this country. And so I had inherited a lot of their patterns. I had to undo those patterns and understand that feelings are a critical way that we maintain our well-being. So to grow up, we have to really, again, just like researching the different kinds of intelligence in our intellectual life, is also emotional intelligence. So learning how to read and express our feelings well and realize that our emotions are really a gift to us. And I think, again, often as women, particularly, we get a lot of very negative messages about emotions, and we are told basically that we are too emotional. Although I always laugh and tell people, if you think that men aren't emotional, just turn on sports talk radio and you will see men being extremely emotional. And so it's just, we're given it because it's considered less important than being thinking. And so that's part of, if we talk about compensating, we often really work hard at our intelligence, but we don't work at our emotional intelligence. And that is just as critical to help us to manage the world in a way that is healthy for us and obviously for other people, because we every day see people who do not know how to read their feelings, and sometimes we call it stewing and spewing, or you just see people shut down completely, and that they're having strong emotional feelings. I always tell people we're always feeling. It's just whether or not we're not always showing what we're feeling, but we're always feeling.
I think for me, I hid certain feelings based on the perception of how I should be, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be at home, and I created anxiety within myself because of my struggle to, what I would show, what I wouldn't show, what I would hold inside, and what I would release. And I've been able to really manage my anxiety and my nerves by just being more open about my emotions and
That's right.
not shying away from showing my emotions.
That's so very true. And, again, as you said, it's not that you don't, I always think, heart, mind, you have to do it together. So I always give myself permission to know what I'm feeling. And then I have to use my mind to go, where am I? Who am I with? Is this the right time? Do I share a little? Can I share? Those people where you can just share it all, and you need to take advantage of that. And there's places where this is how much I can share and be safe. And then but somewhere you have to at least acknowledge it and then recognize that, yeah, it's not a feeling friendly world in many ways. And that we have to, that doesn't have to stop us from knowing how we're feeling and tending to our feelings. Very different. All right. So the next one is spirituality. Now, I know people hear that and they have all kinds of thoughts that come up, but I'm defining it as what gives meaning to your life and what helps you to transcend yourself as a single human being and be able to understand the connectedness of the planet and the earth. Obviously, the global pandemic and climate change have really caused us to understand how interconnected we are. And to me, that is part of our spiritual path. It's those things that we intuit, that we feel and in the air, but we can't grab it and name it and go, here it is. Now, for many of us, the block is that we might have had a specific experience with a specific religion and mandates as children or growing up. And for some people, that may have been a positive experience. And for many people, it was a powerful unconscious force that is driving you in ways that you don't realize until you get to look at it. So it's important to understand, what is your relationship with spirituality or, things that you cannot see, but that you feel are there beyond space and time in a sense. And to grow up and to act your age in that area, it's important to really explore and to question your initial training about what spirituality or religion is and what the purpose is, and to make a choice today. Like, what was the value? I mean, I was raised Catholic, and there was a lot of things that weren't so great about it, but it gave me some core values that helped me at a difficult time in my life as I was growing up, and it felt like a sanctuary in many ways. So I wanted to take and understand what was valuable about it. And then I say, yeah, and these other things that doesn't make sense for me anymore. And really if anything else, I remember when my kids were little, I read a book called, How to Raise, I can't think it was like How to Raise Moral Children in an Immoral World. And so it really helped me to understand that I and everybody, regardless of how we define our spirituality, have to have some moral ideals. We have to have some ethics. And we've seen what happens when people don't have ethics and don't have any moral ideals, and they're just out to be greedy and grasping. And to think about, how are you going to surround yourself in a community of people that share your values and your commitment to well-being, not just for yourself, but for others.
Spirituality is, to me, a moral compass. And I think that religion, because I was raised Greek Orthodox, gave me a great foundation. And as a child, I think you need a framework, you need a foundation to understand and how to navigate. But as you get older, I think it's evolving past what that foundation is and really getting more connected to that value system. But at the same time, I think it's also expanding your mind into, really understanding that a lot of things in many religions are man-made and
yes,
kind of,
created
by man and very much man. And so, being able to separate some of that, the man-made stuff from some of the deeper meaning. And I think a lot of all religions are based on storytelling. All are based on storytelling. And it's really about the crux of what is the story trying to tell you. And really looking at all religions, they all boil down to some very similar ideals and moral beliefs. And
right.
I think that's the critical piece that unites us all, regardless of how you identify with religion, spirituality, and what you believe in. I think that they're all very intertwined.
Exactly. And that's the piece about the interconnectedness about it, is that's, as you say, there are core beliefs in so many of these practices. And I think that's exactly where you want to focus on. And that's what would bring way more peace into the world, without a doubt.
Oh, yes.
All right. So let's get to another one, sensuality. So this is a really interesting one, and I'm defining it as enjoyment, expression, or pursuit of physical, especially sexual pleasure. So our bodies, right? This connects to as you can imagine, as you're seeing, all these things are all completely interconnected. So how we feel about our bodies what we do on our physical level is often very connected to what happened to us on a sensual level. And so, there's a lot of mandates about the value of pleasure for its own sake is not a good thing. And when I looked up different definitions, it was interesting. I found words related to sensuality that included lewdness, unrestrained, lust, and lasciviousness. So there's a lot of unconscious speaking of moral, uh, words that are attached to this level of our being. And to grow up, we have to be able to look at that. One of the biggest blocks to our sensual age is our first sexual experiences, right? Or particularly if it was sexual abuse, or you had traumatic experiences like rape, or even more subtle ones like a partner or partners who don't care about your pleasure and are just interested in their own. So those can all be blocks that get you in a stunted place where you stop thinking that you deserve sensual pleasure, and you just stop growing in that area. So to grow up, it's really important to think about what messages you got about sensuality or sexuality. Again, growing up, so much of this is completely tied to childhood. So growing up, we have to sort of start from the very beginning and wind our way through to see where was that block because little kids are all into sensual pleasure. Oh my goodness, they're so into their joy and to their bodies, and then they get a lot of messages about how to control it. And I think, again, very different messages based on gender and race and all kinds of impacts. And so it's important to pay attention to that. And so to explore where might have been your block, and to really remember right now that you have the power that you may not have had as a child or a teenager, and that you have the power to make different choices about your life, and that it's never too late to grow up and understand what you enjoy sensually. Like that's always the first part, is to ask yourself, what do you love? Like sometimes it's just the sense, being someplace. I know I love it's so essential for me to be at the beach and just feel the heat of the sun, and like sometimes the light breeze, or being in the water, like just the feel of it. Sometimes the hot shower is like such a sensual, joyful experience for me. And so to recognize it's always available. Sometimes it is about, I lit a candle with this wonderful scent, and that your sensuality is it's tied to all your senses, and what are the senses that you might overuse or underuse, and how to do that with more intention.
And hone the ones that maybe you tend to neglect. I think that
Yes.
always tie sensuality in most cases to sex and to something sexual, whereas it's so much more broad than that. I mean, it's that feeling that overcomes you in so many of your senses when you're feeling that pleasure in life. And it says it's in the word itself, sensuality. It's your senses. It's touching upon all those senses. And so, and there's many women who feel embarrassed,
That's
or
right.
nervous to really express themselves sensually. And unlocking that and releasing that will make you feel like so much more of a whole individual, and you'll enjoy things so much more.
That's right. And it's so simple. To me, it's also about making sure where I live, particularly, which is where I spend a lot of time these days. But I'm a nester in a way, because I know that it makes such a difference to me sensually, right? If what I'm looking at brings pleasure to my eyes. I often talk about nature as being eye candy. Like, when I'm someplace absolutely beautiful, like, oh, it just is like such a joy to me. Or like having the scents, the candles, or a diffuser, putting beautiful things around me that I really love, having plants. And also like that connects to the physicalness that we talked about eating and food, right? Like making food that I just love and like I taste it and it just brings me tremendous joy. So really not underestimating or recognizing that every day, all day long, we have the opportunity to nurture and to grow our sensual maturity.
Definitely.
All right, ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. So this was an interesting one for me. But I really decided it was one of the 8 essential ones, and that's creativity. Often people think of creativity as connected to artists. And that is true. They are sort of the people that are given permission on some level, even though they are completely undervalued in this country for sure. And that tells us that's one of the reasons that people don't develop themselves creatively. So as we think about being creative, it's really about thinking that we need to explore our imagination and new possibilities. We don't often think about creativity in our work, but we're always puzzling through something. It is very connected to that idea of intelligence, right? Like the capacity I think of that as to find the third and fourth and fifth option or possibility that you would never have thought about is what creativity is. And someone who is developed creatively is willing to understand that they're always testing hypotheses or ideas. They are always going to fail and they're going to readjust and test and fail. Like that, we don't consciously notice that we're doing this all the time. We do it even when we're cooking. Okay, I think I'm going to add this much, or I'm going to follow I always say the recipes are only somebody's idea of what they like. And so I always look at a recipe and go, well, that's how much salt or that's how much garlic they like. But I like a lot of garlic, so I'm going to double whatever they say, right? So that's my bringing my creativity to my cooking. Some people do it in their clothes and their style. Obviously, I talked about the home. Some people, I do think it's important to think about some way of expressing it in a different, like using your imagination in activities that you enjoy. So it could be dance or art or music, writing, your style, as I said. It's anything that you do that opens up your imagination and makes you see things in a way that you didn't see it before. And obviously, one of the biggest blocks to this has been somebody giving you a negative opinion about your creativity or your imagination or the value of it when you were younger. And so often what we do is we mimic the style or the rhythm or the color scheme or the way of being that we see somebody who has a lot of power telling us this is how you should be. I mean, I remember when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was sworn in and how, there was a lot of women around the world like, oh my God, she's wearing big hoop earrings and she's wearing red lipstick. And, that's not everybody doesn't have to do it, but it's those moments where we see somebody kind of break out of this idea of what is good and right, that it makes us think bigger. And so even if you're not into red lipstick and earrings, you're into, wow, she showed up with her own style. And that gives me permission to show up in my own style as well.
I think so many people have this limited definition of creativity, and it's so centered around art and music and your artistic, our limitations or capabilities. In my case, limitations. And I grew up thinking I was not creative at all. I couldn't draw. Right. I wasn't great. I didn't even enjoy playing music. I mean, I love music, but I don't enjoy playing. I couldn't really, do anything with my hands to come up with like some great, project, right? And as I grew up, I realized that I'm creative in so many other ways that may not be artistic. And creativity is so much more broad than that. And, you come to me with a problem, I can help you solve it in so many different ways. And I think that's super creative. I think that even just allowing myself my own personal creativity in the way that I dress, in the way that I choose certain things without it being limited by, well, what will my world think? I don't really care what my world would think because that's me. And if it's my world, then, accept it. And I think that that's very freeing to not to get rid of those chains.
Yeah, and they are chains, and they're internal chains, right? Like that's some of the way when I wrote the book Breaking Through Your Own Glass Ceiling, I was like, there are so many things, nets, I call them in my book, right? Like these unconscious nets that are trying to grab us and to hold us away from who we really are. And so part of the power of doing this kind of exploration in your life is that you begin to understand the nets, and that, like, you snip them. You're like, yeah, it's just a net. I got what it takes to snip it and then to see it and make different choices, which I think for me is always the biggest thing for all the work that I do, is to give people different choices. And that's definitely when I do my coaching, I am creative beyond belief. That is that place of, well, what about that? Or have you thought about that? And they're like, oh my goodness, no. And I'm like, well, great. It is, being a mature creative is really about being curious and to not being afraid to try different things, and knowing that failure is the road to deeper wisdom and deeper understanding around what we really care about in life. All right, 2 more to go.
Right.
Don't get overwhelmed, everybody. The most important thing is that you got time.
For sure.
So financial. This was such a big thing for me. And I put, I devoted 2 chapters in my book because I found that so many people had so many blocks and glass ceilings, and I think particularly women, around financial maturity. I know I was not raised to think that the sky was the limit, or that I had the right to accumulate wealth. It was just not something that I was taught. So when let's talk about financial maturity. Some of it is really the simple question about, managing and earning and creating money to support the lifestyle you want until you die. And so it's all over a long period of time. So financial independence is when you've accumulated enough investments, right? So passive income that you can produce what you need for the rest of your life. I thought it was interesting. Somebody talked about financial security, which is, I think, what a lot of people don't really pay attention to, which is freedom from worry. Now, that is not about how much money you have. That is about your level of understanding and conscious decision making. That I say to myself, as an artist, I know that I need a certain amount of time to write. And that's time when I may not be generating income or looking into investments or doing all the other things. And I'm just clear, like, okay, so this is my budget based on what I want to do in my life and what brings me joy. And so I am willing to not do certain things so that I can do this. So it's not, security is about, it's about the worry. It's not really, because there are people who have millions and they worry all the time, or they never feel like it's enough. And so financial maturity is when you are using your resources with what brings you joy, and that you have found a balance. Again, like we talked about strength training, it's not always fun, but you understand the long-term value of being conscious about money, understanding it's just energy, it's not evil. Just because other people do it in ways you don't approve of, that doesn't mean that's what you have to do. And so, the block is often, for a lot of my clients, has been that money and prosperity, they have it connected to, some negative attitude about what it will do to hurt people. So growing up is pretty obvious in some ways, is educating yourself so that you have a working knowledge of your personal financial statements, your assets, your debts, your income, and your expenses. You know the tax rules, you know what they do to you or they don't do to you, you know how to work with them, and you understand the impact of all of that. The great thing is there are people who know all this stuff who would love to teach you and train you. And I know that for me, I have used a lot of people because I was very financially illiterate growing up. And it really wasn't until probably I was in my 40s where I understood, oh, I need to grow up.
I was in financial services for 18 years. And one of the things that was very eye-opening to me is that some of the people that we quote unquote consider smart, doctors, surgeons, attorneys, I mean, really people that you consider, wow, like they just have it together, scientists, are sometimes the most financially illiterate because they're
Yes.
so focused on what it is that they're doing, which is wonderful, and their intellectual maturity is out off the charts, that they kind of have left some of that other stuff to the side. And it was really eye-opening to me. So I'm like, these are the people that in your mind, again, your own kind of perceptions that you kind of create based on how you grew up, they've got it together. And it's so not true. And just because someone has a lot of money doesn't mean that they're secure, doesn't mean that they're managing it well, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be financially independent.
Yeah.
Because how many child stars or sports players or people that are making multi millions that you're like, they're going to be set for their life and their grandchildren's life and all that, and then they're broke.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so none of that's correlated. And no matter how much money you make, it's really important to understand it so that you live within the the lifestyle that you can and want.
Yes. Yes. I think that's so right. And thank you for bringing that up. It's so true. Yeah. All right. So now we have our final factor. And again, I think it's something like the creativity where people wouldn't naturally think about it. But as I really thought about it and I thought about the work I do with a lot of my clients, it showed up so often that I went, no, no, this is an area of critical need in terms of growing up. And that's the cultural piece because it's like the air we breathe on some level. There's a way we don't quite see it, and we it's really such a basis of who we are. And so when I talk about knowing where you come from, it's understanding that we weren't born into a vacuum, right? We were born into sometimes multiple cultural milieus, different norms, different activities, different expectations. And that it's often like being culturally literate. You both have to understand your own particular cultural location, and you have to understand the dominant, the more powerful cultural location, and then make choices around being safe, but also in terms of being yourself and understanding, often people of color talk about code switching. And I think people code switch all the time, everywhere. I mean, literally, I always say, like the medical field, the legal field, the financial field, to me, those are all, for many people, a different language. And so there is a way that I will speak to somebody based on so many different things. And there's languages I don't know well, and that impact how I manage. And so part of this is sort of waking up and going, there are, we talk about it a lot of times when I do my equity work around that every organization has cultural norms, and those are the unwritten rules. And people are like, what is that? I go, it's like if you have a friend coming to work where you work, what are you going to tell them so that they can do well? It's that. It's not written in the personnel policy. Every place has cultural norms, and you often find out what they are by running into them, by breaking them, right? And so maybe you came from a place where if the meeting started at 9, that really meant 9:10. And then you come to another place, and when they say 9, oh, they mean 9. So you saunter in at 9:05 thinking you're early, and everybody looks at you. And so it's really about articulating who are you culturally, like what, and that again, as we talked about, this connects to all the other areas. So any area that you grow intentionally, you're going to grow other areas just because they're all connected. When we talked about spirituality and values, right? Values is underlying all of these areas. And so understanding, different aspects of the cultural connections you have based on your circumstances, and understanding the political, spiritual, economic, and psychological significance of who you are culturally and that there's power dynamics that are involved in all of this. And so, one of the blocks I know for me growing up, one of my blocks was that I was really taught, oh, you got to pick English or Spanish, like you cannot, bilingual in this country particularly is not something that is valued or understood. And so that was a block for me for a long time. And then I finally realized, oh, heck, no, speaking Spanish is part of my cultural identity and I want to embrace it. And fun fact, it's really great to speak two languages. It really helps. And so part of it growing up for me was, I know, and for many people, is to not create a hierarchy of cultures. Like it's not this is better than, this is less than, you need to know this, you need to assimilate, you need to forget. No, it's like about bringing your full, complete self and to understand what that means for you.
Yeah, I find that with immigrant families, my family being immigrants from Greece, you do tend to either have we hold our Greek culture in America very tightly and we put that on a higher level. But you also
Yeah.
find other people that try to assimilate so much that they want to completely get rid of that uh, culture or, whatever, and become American.
Right.
And in a way, it's hard when you're growing up in either of those extremes because you do relate to some and you do relate to the
Yes.
other, and you relate to all of them, and that's all part of your culture. And it's almost like a new culture that you've formed that combines the best of both, or many more, not just both. It could, be many other things that contribute to that. But I do feel that it's especially a problem with families that are very tied to their um, country or cultural background and they're somewhere else.
Right. And it's understandable on one level because, wow, that's your heart, right?
That's
And yeah, and because in this, at least in the United States, there isn't that embracing of differences in a really authentic way that you feel like you want to protect that part of you. And then, I think for me growing up was recognizing as you said, it's abundance for me to be able to pick from different cultures. The only thing for me that I'm careful about, and that's sometimes a block to people growing up in this area, is that we sometimes will grab another culture because it's just it is easy, or because it's easier than looking into our own. Like, sometimes there are some problematic ancestral issues, and we're seeing a lot of that now in terms of in this country around people trying to understand and wrap their head around the Black Lives Matter and sort of like who and what is their responsibility in this situation. And they're the same people who will listen to Black music and use Black language and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, there's a way to, as you say, embrace and value and appreciate cultures, but not when you're trying to hide from something which is your own. That's what I mean by, you got to know where you come from. No culture, no people did not have difficult things that happen. That's the human condition. And avoiding it is really one of the blocks I have found in being mature in terms of your cultural identities.
So much of what you said in these 8 elements really tie back to authenticity too. I
That's
think
right.
that being okay with who you are at a really deep level, even when it's not so pretty, because
Yes,
just accepting the fact that we're all human and it isn't going to always be pretty, and being
that's
okay with that, and that being part of your authentic self. A lot of these key elements touch upon that, and it really hit home for me in terms of just kind of that, presenting my authentic self in so many situations and ways that, and in some I identified myself more mature than others, and I have some work to do now.
right. Well, I think that's the pieces that we all do, because this is why I tell people, yeah, of course, yeah, you don't always act the way you think you are supposed to act, or you think, wow, that's not me. because it is very challenging to really grow up in all these areas. And so for me, I think the first piece is to go, where am I? Right? Just like you said, just honest, no judgment, acceptance, compassion. Like, yeah, how could you possibly have grown up in all these areas? There's no way. Right. And then to say, which ones, as I think about who I am and what I want to be in the world, where are, one or two changes I want to make in each one that would bring me a more of a sense of balance and authenticity. So if I'm overcompensating in one area, actually, sometimes the action is to back off, right? To say, you know what, maybe I don't need to take any more courses or read any more books on this area. I kind of got it down, right there. And you'll see that there are people that every like book on self-help and emotional, whatever, they're on it, but they couldn't tell you what their budget is. Right? So it's that piece around going, where are those areas? Maybe think everyone has probably two at least they really overdo and lean on too much. And to say, how can I do less in this area? How can I accept and value? I'm good here. I am really good here. And celebrate that. And then pick maybe one or two areas where you're like, oh, wow, this could really make a difference in my life if I focused on these, and really be patient and to, take your time. And hopefully my goal is to have the book out in a year so that will be a wonderful tool for people to help you go on this journey, which is never ending.
Linda, this was great. Thank you so, so much for all of your advice and tips. I am very excited to kind of do some work on myself and find out how old I am. And it was great. Thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for asking.